right, Saturday morning means it's a good time to talk about Lockean property rights theory. Which is actually simpler than it may seem, but it is kind of fun to say. Lockean is referring to the philosopher John Locke from the 1700s, influential on the American Revolution. In fact, Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence has the famous quote about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Prior to Jefferson's writing that, and influential upon Jefferson, obviously, was John Locke's quote in his second treatise on government, which stated the principles of life, liberty, and property. So Jefferson borrowed those ideas from Locke, and when it was pointed out that he not plagiarized, but was influenced by Locke, Jefferson stated something like, well, I was stating truths, not claiming I discovered them. So it's a kind of clever way of doing that. But anyway, but John Locke develops a pretty interesting and workable theory of property rights. I mean, we'll have to evaluate whether or not you think it's workable. But he works property rights not from ethics so much as from human nature and ownership, starting kind of with ownership of the body. Thomas Jefferson actually does the same thing in the Declaration of Independence. And so Locke's argument of property rights works like this. He recognizes, and this will sound kind of similar to the Declaration of Independence as well, he recognizes that human beings, which he believed to be created by God, came into the world equal insofar as their status as human beings, that whatever advantages or disadvantages that we may have, equalities or inequalities, that we all have the status of human beings who enter into the world, therefore, or as Jefferson would call it, created equal. And so, based on that, we as humans exist in time and space. And we only understand our context as being in time and space, meaning we are in a physical environment and we are subject to the constraints of that physical environment as well as subject to the constraints of time. And so, when we enter the world, we have other needs in order to survive. We need oxygen, we need food, we need clothing, we need shelter. As infants, we need care that can raise us until we're able to care for ourselves. And so, since that is a concomitant part of human existence, and concomitant, I mean a necessary part of human existence, we have to manipulate the physical world around us in time and space in order to continue our survival. Now, where Locke gets onto this is he says we have life. That's something that we possess inherently on our own, just in our existence, and we want to continue our life, so we have the right to do that. And then liberty, we operate ourselves. We have the highest claim to our bodies, higher than anyone else does, and therefore we should not kidnap or imprison or enslave anyone, and no one should kidnap, imprison, or enslave us. And then property, which he'll argue where that comes from, starts with the principle of self-ownership of the body. That we have the highest claim to our own body, more so than anyone else does. So, that being the case, and it also being the case that we have to manipulate our physical environment to survive, meaning we have to go out and actually do things like get food, water, clothing, shelter, and things of that nature, we also, that becomes a right as well, that we can acquire property according to Locke. Many people may not agree with Locke, but we can acquire property in one of three ways. First one is by homesteading. Okay, that's kind of the idea that it's manipulation of the physical environment, that in doing so, you create property. So for example, Locke uses the example of, since we have to use our physical environment to survive, if a human being goes out and drinks water in order to continue his survival, that human being, once they have imbibed the water into their body, the water becomes part of them, and it is part of the continuance of their survival. The water has become that person's property by homesteading. They have mixed their labor with the water, they have gotten the water, and they have now imbibed the water, and the water has become part of their property as an extension of their self-ownership of their body. Now that's if they don't steal the water that belongs to somebody else, or they don't trick someone or commit fraud or do something or take something that is already somebody else's property or something of that nature. But Locke's theory was, if you go out, and same with food, you see an acorn on a tree and you eat the acorn and you digest it, it becomes part of you, it continues your survival, your life, then therefore it becomes your property. And then he extends from there. Then he believes it's logical to assume that because we need to manipulate the physical environment to survive, whatever we homestead, whatever we mix our labor with, becomes therefore our property, as long as it does not first belong to someone else. We didn't commit theft through fraud, we didn't trick someone or something to get it, that homesteading becomes our property. So my car becomes an extension of my self-ownership. While it's not the same as my body, I'd rather someone steal my car than kill me, I went out and used my mind and used my body to work, to receive money, to pay for a car, and therefore, since that was part of my self-ownership, my car becomes part of my self-ownership, therefore becomes my property. So that's his kind of idea of homesteading. Now there are limits. You can't just go out and take a cap of red dye and throw it in the ocean and say, well, now I've manipulated the physical environment and I've mixed my labor with land or with a physical commodity, and now it becomes the whole ocean now belongs to me. There are limits on those things, and it may be a little bit tricky at some point to say what the limits are, but Locke would probably argue that just the area that you mixed the dye with would become your property. So that's one way. Homesteading, according to Locke, would be one way to get property. Another way to get property would be through voluntary trade. This would include buying and selling, because buying and selling is a form of voluntary trade. Now it has to be voluntary. It can't be trade based on coercion, force, or duress, which is the threat of force. And so voluntary trade could be trading money for something else. It's that each person involved wants the other thing that the other person has more than they want what they have. The peaceful, voluntary way to get both people what they want and both of them leave feeling like they have some sort of advantage is voluntary trade. What people voluntarily trade on without any sort of fraud or other misguidance, being misled or something of that nature, also becomes your property. So when I bought a car, I wanted the car more than I wanted X amount of dollars. The car company that I bought it from wanted X amount of dollars more than they wanted the car. We traded. Now the car is my property, the money is their property, and we go our separate ways and do with those things what we will. Okay, now I have the highest claim to the ownership of this car. And it works with all kinds of other things as well. So, homesteading, mixing the physical environment, manipulating the physical environment with your labor becomes your property according to Locke. Voluntary trade, and then the third, and trade, we should mention, also includes work. It includes labor. People want to trade their labor for something that they want more, which is money. People are willing to give up. They want the money more than they want the time and energy from their labor. And people who employ them want the time and energy from their labor more than they want the money. So they facilitate a trade. This is why work is not inherently an exploitative situation, because it's a voluntary trade. Third is the third way of getting property, acquiring property legitimately, is through a gift. You can give something or receive it. That as soon as it's been given as a gift, it no longer becomes it's no longer yours. It no longer is your property. Or once you receive it, it is no longer that person's property. It becomes yours. Now, there are exceptions to that, like an engagement ring or something is a gift on the basis of assuming that a marriage will take place. So if a marriage doesn't take place, the person should give the engagement ring back. However, a gift becomes someone else's property, so that people can voluntarily give something according to whether they want to or not, and a person has to voluntarily also receive it. So a gift can be refused, and a gift does not have to be given. So those are the three ways of acquiring property according to Lockean property rights. To do otherwise, outside of those three, and the exceptions, legitimate exceptions within them, is theft. That people do not have a right to the property and labor of others according to Locke. That to do so, to violate those things, is a form of theft. But anyway, that's how Locke reasoned his way from self-ownership to the right of property, was through the ownership of our body and our existence in time and space, and our need to manipulate the physical environment around us in order to facilitate our continued existence, necessitates that right of property in those three areas.